Well, hello and welcome, and thank you for joining me again this week as we continue our look at the book of Proverbs. And I hope you're getting as much benefit out of them as I do. I find that as many times as I read them, I never can ever say that I've completely grasped the whole message. As I've said before, as life changes and experiences changes, somehow we see these same passages from a different and deeper perspective. Oftentimes they kind of penetrate a lot deeper than they did the first time we may have read through them. I remember my early days reading Proverbs, and I'd be able to really get through the book pretty quickly. But as I've gotten older, I find that I spend a lot of time just lingering over a passage and reflecting upon it because they're vitally important messages that we need to be able to implant deep in our hearts. Oh, by the way, you may notice I have a different t-shirt, and I really have to kind of stand up so you can read it, although you probably won't be able to read it because it's in Hebrew. But this is one of my latest acquisitions from our last trip to Israel. And what it says, it has, of course, a sheep there, and it says, I like chocolate in Hebrew. That's all it says. And I would just say, if you've ever gone to the Max Brenner chocolate shop in Tel Aviv, like would be a kind word, love would be close. It's the most amazing chocolate I think I've ever eaten in my life, and I've eaten a lot of chocolate in my life. So anyway, ever get to Tel Aviv, go to Max Brenner's and get the greatest chocolate there is on the planet. But now, moving on, we're at Proverbs chapter 13. I want to begin this week talking about verse 3, where Solomon makes this statement. He says, "Those who guard their lips preserve their lives, but those who speak rashly will come to ruin." And what exactly does he mean by somebody who is speaking rashly? Well, it can be reckless or angrily, basically without careful consideration, especially not really measuring the consequences of what your words will say. And this is a pretty common experience for most of us. I think that unless you're somebody who has a hard time even verbalizing your feelings, you probably have had occasions where you've said things and you wished you could have taken them back. Maybe because they were not appropriate for the situation. I mean, it's like going to a funeral and asking the widow, "How's your day going?" I mean, I understand your intention, but it's really not what you want to be saying at that moment, because their day obviously is going really, really badly. But at the same time, we find that oftentimes it's anger that causes us to speak out recklessly and to not really consider what's coming out of our mouth. And that's why it's always important to keep a good monitor on your anger levels. Remember, again, we talked about don't be angry, but don't sin. And that really means that when you realize you're angry, we need to step back and really say, "Okay, God, help me to understand my anger and to work through my anger." Because unless you do that, your anger will take over and control your life, and you'll suffer a lot of consequences. And so will those people around you. It's like the saying they used to have during World War II, when they say loose lips sink ships. Well, I think that loose lips can also ruin relationships and impact people's lives negatively as well. When we make an unkind or uncareful comment about somebody that kind of diminishes or affects them incorrectly or makes them really feel bad about themselves, that can mean that you have a strained relationship. Now, granted, it may be the opportunity for you to be able to really kind of, say that you're sorry for what you said, and hopefully you can undo whatever harm was caused by that. But nonetheless, it's really, really, really important that we try to be thoughtful. And when we say something that's wrong, and we do, you and I all the time do, then we need to be willing, when we're confronted by it, to say, "Hey, I'm sorry. I wasn't being sensitive or careful when I made that comment." And part of that thing becomes a challenge. How do I learn to be more thoughtful before I speak, and then to say things in a very precise or concise way so that it really does represent what you want to say? Now, there are some people who are so afraid of offending other people that they don't speak the truth to them. And you've probably heard me romp in this theme a lot. But really, I was just reading an article yesterday about the collapse of culture and society in England. And part of the problem is they said it's not just the influx of other peoples with different ethnicities and racial groups and cultural backgrounds, which has really been a big influence. But he said the fact that most Britons were too polite to say anything about it. They just simply have been silent in the midst of all these changes. And that's not something I recommend. I think that we need to have the courage to speak up about things that don't make sense and aren't right. I mean, really, the whole LGBTQ thing has been able to get traction because part of it was because we were silenced during COVID, but also it became something that got a negative reaction, and so people didn't want to be thought poorly of, and so they just simply avoided confronting the issues. And now, I've been on airplanes many times where the flight attendant has been a person who is trying to live in an alternate reality. Well, I remember one pilot, or not pilot, but attendant who, was wearing all the female accoutrements except he was clearly a male, the eyelashes, lipstick, and liner, and all that sort of stuff. I didn't say anything to the gentleman because I didn't think that was an appropriate place or time, and it really wouldn't have been a meaningful conversation. I might have even been asked to step off the plane. But the whole point was that when we're in situations where people are doing that and it does make sense and the opportunity to say something, then rather than simply telling them that they're wrong, probably the best thing to do is simply to ask them a question. So what gender are you? How do you identify at this moment? And I find that as you continue to ask questions, for example, what do you identify as? And as they give you their explanation, then you follow up the question. So how do you conclude how do you figure that out? What brought you to that conclusion? And you let people begin to tell you their story. Oftentimes they'll build enough trust that they might be able to have an honest conversation, even to the point of saying, but it doesn't really make any sense to me, because you're clearly biologically a male, and if you had to go in for surgery, they would operate you on it as a male, not as a female. So, there's 6 organs that you don't have in your body that women have in theirs. You have a different circulatory system, skeletal system. I mean, the list of differences biologically alone is huge. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that if I just decide that I'm going to be different, that I can. I suspect, friend, that there's something going on a much deeper level in your life. You see, and the point is that if we can have a conversation like that, we're not rejecting their person. We're just basically helping them to make sense to us. And if they can convince you that's okay, well, they simply can't. They just can try. But the point is that we have an obligation to be truth speakers. And that's why I think that it may cost a relationship. So loose lips are lips basically that are just, we spurt things out without thinking about them. But if we're going to address serious issues with people, then we need to really kind of step back and begin to ask questions. And one of the first ones is, why are you so angry? Or was there something that I said? Or why do you feel the way that you feel? We have that kind of common control rather than just reactive and saying, how dare you get mad at me or say that about me. And it really, sometimes there are people that you just can't talk to because they're filled with anger and they're just looking for somebody to rage on. I get that. And the best thing in that situation is to walk away. And it's like Abraham Lincoln said, if you encounter a mad dog running down the street, the best thing to do is step out of his way. And I find that to be true. But when you're in a situation where you can have a conversation and it makes sense, then those can be great opportunities to help somebody understand what's going on in their life, and maybe even to help you to understand what their journey is. Because I find that everybody has a story. There's not a single one of us. We've grown up in this world that's been damaged by sin, and there are a lot of evil people out there who are doing evil things. And so, people have stories. A lot of people have been victimized at some point or another in their life, and eventually they may slip into becoming a victimizer because that behavior became normalized to them. But you can be the one who makes a difference, and that may make them uncomfortable, but isn't that the point? If they can become a little bit uncomfortable, then maybe we can help them to move past it. But I guess I would just kind of wrap up with what James said. If I could take a little extra time here, where James says in chapter 1 of his letter to the church, he says, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, especially talking about things that are said in anger. Later on in chapter 3 of the same book, he says, beginning in verse 2, we all stumble in many ways, and anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. And when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships, for example. He says, although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, sea creatures, and are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poisons. Well, his point isn't that we should stop talking. He said is basically that we just need to be careful when we do talk. Well, we'll move on to verse 4 tomorrow. So thanks for hanging in there today. God bless you and go in his grace.